So for our in-person team here, like I said, we have people from all over Canada joining us, and a few people who have joined us before when a couple months ago we had a rural retreat. So some of this will be kind of information that you've heard already, but we're really trying to focus in on like the content itself, and then how can we use this content as we move forward, even like facilitating it for our own communities. So yeah, this is digital literacy for youth. We'll move to the next slide. Just give Angelica a minute.
We make the slide bigger.
Oh, 1 second.
You can't see anything.
Angelica's asking if we can make them big. I can't communicate. Sorry, 1 second, team. We're just
Full screen.
full screening it. Okay, there we go.
go.
All right.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
A
A little bit of tech issues on our end.
We want to take notes. All
right. So what are we discussing today? Today we want to discuss like the impacts of online hate and discrimination, how it manifests in our communities, specifically kind of that way that it bridges the gap between physical and online space. We had some conversations earlier today about oppression and how it manifests in Canada, and we're going to pull in a little bit and look more at this, how digital literacy, misinformation, disinformation, and oppression kind of are linked to each other. Let's go to the next slide, Angelica. So before we get really into it, let's talk about what digital literacy actually is, because I've thrown the term at you a bunch, but let's talk about what that means for people. And I kind of wanted to open it up both to the chat online and to people here. When I say the word digital literacy, what jumps out of you? What does that mean to you? Yeah, an understanding of algorithms and how they work. Yeah, no problem. It can be a really complicated word, and it's one of those words that has quite a variety of meanings. But in its most basic form, digital literacy is our ability to understand and navigate the digital world. So it involves not only like our ability to use digital technology, but like our ability to read it, to engage critically with it, and also our ways that we learn new digital technology. It's one of the things that's often missed. It's not just your current technology, but how do you start to understand new technology, new social media, new forms of digital media that are presented towards you. And like it mentions on the slide, digital literacy is quite a large spectrum. So some people might be an expert in certain parts of understanding the digital world, but not other parts. So for instance, some people might struggle to understand some aspects of online platforms. So if I look at my parents, for instance, they will struggle with things like TikTok, with Snapchat, Instagram, even like then we can go a little bit further, things that we might struggle to understand even in our own group. So things like Discord. Maybe not everyone in this group understands Discord, so maybe some do, because it's a specialized social media space. So like some people, you can maybe have a really high understanding of like, say, the academic space online. And then other people maybe have like a really intense understanding of gaming spaces online. And then there's subgroups within those spaces where people might have a very high level of digital literacy. So it's a wide spectrum, and we can't possibly be expected to understand all of it. However, there are some tools that we're going to discuss today that will help us better approach different parts of the internet. And so we can use those tools even when we're trying to access other parts of digital space, to help us better understand, especially when we are getting into what's been, and we'll get a little bit more into it later, but we are entering into something that's been kind of called the golden age of misinformation and disinformation. It's something that we've been in a while, and then as we are moving into these technologies like AI that we're only starting to just understand now, people are really understanding. It's like, oh, we thought we were in the golden age before, but it's getting even more now. And a lot of times these technologies are being used in the physical space as well, or to influence the physical space, or vice versa. And we'll get in a little bit more into those tools in a moment, but if we could go to the next slide, Angelica, I want to talk a little bit about social stride. and what we've been doing for the past few years. So Social Stride, when it first began, it was really a space where we were trying to not only understand the digital space and how that interplayed with the physical space, but also we were trying to provide responsive support to people who are experiencing issues with hate, issues with oppression, racism, discrimination of all kinds. But also a lot of times we found that they were also encountering that combined with misinformation and disinformation about themselves, about the groups that they belong to. So when we first began, we very much kind of functioned as a response system to when we were seeing hate online. And so over those couple of years, we collected some data on that and what people were facing the most often online. And I'll explain that this comes with a little bit of a note, but the aspect that people were most targeted on overwhelmingly was race and ethnicity. And then you can kind of see the bar graph on the left, how religion comes after that, then gender, source of income, disability, sexual identity, age, and then kind of a miscellaneous category. And so while this does line up with a lot of real world experiences of what people are targeted on, I also want to point out that even though like race and ethnicity definitely is the most likely that people are targeted on, that doesn't mean that all those other categories don't have similar levels. So one of the things that we know about hate, whether that is something that is said kind of say a slur in conversation or racist jokes, or it escalates to violence, we know that it's underreported, both to law enforcement and then to community organizations that are not associated to law enforcement. And there are some communities that will not talk about the hate they experience. So this is really, really common in the disability community. So even though we see on our graph here that disability is one of our lower ones, we know that is that's much more likely that's quite a bit higher than what it is right now, because it's a community that doesn't report. And then there's also data subgroups within say race and ethnicity. For example, we know the Indigenous community often does not report. So they are often a lost metric within that. So take a look at these, be aware of them, but be aware that just as much information as they tell us, they also tell us about all these missing pieces of data as well, all these missing groups that we are not really getting the full picture from, either because hate's been normalized in their community, or there's a fear of backlash within that community, whether that's from law enforcement, from their family members, from their religious communities, from school, from friends. There's a lot of pressure not to report, especially when hate has been normalized. So on the other side, though, you see the types of hate that we also categorized. So the 4 ones that we looked at were hateful material. So hateful material can encompass things like hate propaganda, or it could be say you're on TikTok or Instagram and you're scrolling and you see a hateful meme. That's all hate material. Generally, hate material, if you look at our Canadian Criminal Code, it's something that is classified under non-criminal incidents of hate. So it's not actually in the criminal code. So there's incidents of hate, and then when they cross a certain line, they become crimes that are motivated by hate. So a crime needs to occur for something to be considered that, but most hate material tends to fall under that incident level. However, it can cross the line. One of the things that was actually added very recently to our Canadian Criminal Code was hate material related to anti-Semitism, specifically the use of swastikas and stuff like that. Up until a few months ago, that was not part of the Canadian Criminal Code. That was categorized as a non-criminal incident of hate. So it sometimes takes a while for these things to be introduced to our legislation. And it can be difficult to kind of see where that line is, especially when you look at, this country we often call Canada, what they value as hate, or how it differs between different jurisdictions, different provinces, even different like law enforcement groups, it'll differ what they view as hate. Because a lot of it is up to sometimes personal perception, either of law enforcement or for like if it goes even higher of the justice system itself. Went on with a little bit of a tangent there, but hate material basically it covers a very, very wide spectrum of things. The other one we looked at, harassment, so that could be things like, you've seen a lot in person as like, say, someone making, derogatory remarks in person or slurs yelled out on the street, but that can happen online too. It can happen in private messages. It can happen in public forums. If you looked at a news article that touches even a little bit on people's experiences of like race or gender or any of those factors, you'll probably see something like that too. I'm sure we've all experienced that in some way or form. And then, derogatory slurs, kind of there's a little bit of the two kind of blend into each other. Sometimes these types of hate, they will hit multiple categories. So you could have, hateful material happen, but then you could also like say a threat might occur at the same time. So it's things to keep in mind when we're looking at data, that very often hate incidences are not just a single hate incident. They cover multiple aspects. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what hate has been like, what that experience of like either hate or experiences of like oppression, misinformation, and disinformation has happened in your life. But I want to talk a little bit about this pyramid first. So this is a fantastic resource from the Anti-Defamation League. We have this resource called the Pyramid of Hate. They also have something online, especially if you want to speak to people who are maybe a little bit younger than yourself about like, what does it mean to see oppression online? What does it mean to see hate online? They have an excellent 15-minute course for youth on there that honestly, even I found helpful. It's not even geared towards me. So I really recommend looking at the Anti-Defamation League's Pyramid of Hate course. But let's talk a little bit about what this actually is. So you can see that we have this kind of pyramid, and it may look a little bit inverted for you to at first. We have like genocide at the very top and biased attitudes at the very bottom. And we're looking at this, we really want to look at this as a tool to understand how does hate, oppression, racism, discrimination, how does that manifest? And we know it starts at the very, very bottom, at the foundation, which is biased attitudes. Biased attitudes lead to acts of bias, which can lead to discrimination, which can lead to bias-motivated violence, and then finally, the most serious form that it can take, it can lead to genocide. And we can see in different parts of the world now how this is manifesting in very clearly, where it started, how it's ended up, and then, but it's also important, like it's not just how it starts, like things can start at a certain point and they can impact other parts of the pyramid. But the most important thing to take away from this slide is that to get to those most serious points, to get to bias motivated violence, to get to genocide, it needs that foundation of biased attitudes. So a lot of people consider maybe genocide and bias motivated violence to be the most serious. And I kind of wanted to encourage us to think a little bit differently about that, because it starts at biased attitudes, and that should be treated just as seriously. A lot of times you'll hear the term microaggressions. It's not a term that I enjoy because it implies that these aggressions are they're tiny things, or that they are only felt a little bit. And to the people that experience them, they're not felt a little bit. They're felt very deeply. And it's those little microaggressions or verbal assaults, sometimes is a better word for them, that allow it to pile up, allow it to cause things like acts of bias and discrimination. Yeah, and I just want to be really mindful, they're not these little things. They're not little impacts to people. And I think it's really easy for us to dismiss them, especially if you come from a culture where maybe you don't experience those little acts of bias attitudes much. It can be easy to dismiss them. It's just well, they're little things. Let's not worry about them. Absolutely not. It's the foundation. It's the foundation in which all oppression is based out of. So it's just important for us to tackle those. When we kind of bring up the pyramid of hate, we often ask people like, where do you see yourself in this pyramid? And it doesn't necessarily have to be as a person that is, say, inflicting or perpetuating that hate. It can also be as a person who's like experiencing it or is victimized by it or is hurt by it in some way. A lot of times we'll try and bring this up to, youth who are much younger than everyone that we have here. Because a lot of times youth won't really see themselves in this pyramid. They'll always like see themselves as maybe a victim of hate. But one of the things about the pyramid of hate is that we can both be impacted by it as a victim, but we can also be the perpetrators of it. And a lot of times, especially really young people, or people who maybe spend a lot of times online, I see it a lot in the gaming space, people are both the victims and the perpetrators of hate. I'm sure we've seen it online before, news articles, maybe gaming, maybe among your friends, where someone will say a hateful comment. And that hateful comment will lash back and say something hateful in return. And so you have this perpetuating cycle of violence. So I kind of want to bring it again up to everyone, and I apologize to the in-person team. I'm going to minimize it a little bit so I can see any potential comments, and I'll bring it back up. But I want to know, like, how do we see, or rather, where do you see online spaces and how do they influence, sorry, words are difficult. I've been up for a very long time. How do online spaces influence how hate manifests online? What have you seen online? Like things that you would like to, maybe things you would like to address, or just something that's impacted you in some way?
It's either always meant as sarcasm or it's just teasing instead of actual hate. It's masked as something less than it is.
Yeah, it's masked as jokes. What about anyone else experiences of it online? It's hard to hear what. Yeah, so we just had Blue mention that a lot of times when we see hate and how it manifests online, it's often through the lens of, oh, it's just a joke or it's sarcasm. And so it's either meant to undercut that hate or to obscure it in some way. Is that kind of accurate? Yeah, all right. Any other experiences people want to share? Ooh. Oh, hold on, sorry, I just got hold on. Something just popped up. Hold on, we've got tech support rushing in to help me. Okay, we're still good. Computer tried to push an update. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel that hate, the reason probably that it keeps on manifesting is maybe due to people's different perspective on what certain situation is on the ladder on the pyramid. So like some person might see a certain act of in a situation maybe just biased attitude, whereas another person might perceive that same situation as discrimination. And so it's quite difficult for someone to clear cut be like, hey, you need to stop that because there's people on both sides.
Yeah, so we had a comment, I'm not sure if that was heard clearly, basically about how sometimes might have different perspectives. So someone might view a particular incident as a biased attitude, and another person might view it as an act of bias or even like discrimination outright. So sometimes we get into conflict because people have different perspectives of what that particular incident is. Did I kind of sum that up correctly? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to bounce off of that, I also feel like with different perspectives, from what I've seen online, I've seen like two sides of a coin where like some people will be like, oh, it's just a joke, like you said, like it's just teasing. And then other people will feel like that they're in the right to discriminate a group of people. So like as an example, at the height of COVID, there was a lot of influx of racism towards honestly anyone that was Asian.
Mm-hmm.
And from like what I've read online, from people spreading hateful comments and everything, they have almost like a form of superiority about them. Like, it's like, I'm right and everyone agrees with me about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Angelica, if you could let me know if that was something you heard, or I can sum it up. Basically the idea, yeah, it's hard to hear. Basically the idea was that, or the comment that was shared was that sometimes people feel like they have a right to spread hate. So depending on certain scenarios that might be like happening in current events. We had someone here mention that, like for example, with COVID happened, some people had this moral superiority or felt they had the right to discriminate against people of Asian heritage. So that's one of the ways that we've kind of seen it manifest online. Did I kind of sum that up all right? Okay, good. Anyone else want to share? Yeah, Adana, go
I think
ahead.
this has been mentioned before, but I think hate manifests because people think they're right else online. That you can't be found because at the end of the day, some of these things they say online, they wouldn't say to the person in front of like to their faces.
Yeah,
And so just because you know, okay, I can hide under a fake profile, then I'm able to say this thing towards this person.
yeah, absolutely true. We had another comment here is that sometimes people feel more willing to spread hate online because they can remain anonymous. They can hide behind a fake profile. You see that a lot actually with like social media specifically, where people maybe will say a hateful comment, they'll get blocked and the comment will delete it. They can just make a new profile and they can keep going and going and going and going. Yeah, summed it up okay? Okay. All right, anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add on to that I also feel like with the use of AI programming now, it is a lot more difficult to flag something that's being hateful or discriminatory.
Yeah. It was mentioned that with the influx of AI programming now, it makes it really difficult to flag something as hateful or discriminatory, which is very, very true because you can kind of direct AI now to skirt that line or to hide certain things. One of the things that's really common in hate groups, even if people don't officially assign themselves to be like belonging to hate groups, is that they learn the language of hate groups. So they learn how to code their messages. So one of the ones that I found out fairly recently that I didn't know about before was sometimes people will use triple parentheses around, say, the name of someone or a certain organization or something, and that's meant to suggest that they are somehow aligned with Jewish people. And so it's meant to signal to other people in that they're in group that, you know, this is someone that we're targeting, or this is someone that is Jewish, whether or not they are, you know? So there's a lot of coded messages within the online space. And then when you bring in AI, that problem becomes even worse because AI pulls from us. AI pulls from humans. So AI learns how to use dog whistles. The other problem with AI is it can be very, very easily manipulated. So one of the most common ones that we know that people use right now called ChatGTP, it's a online AI writing service. ChatGTP, one of the main places it pulls from is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is a open source website where people, like anyone, I could go on there right now and edit an article about, say, the John Humphrey Centre. And I could say the John Humphrey Centre, I don't know, really likes dogs, and just add that to our organizational profile. And might not be changed for quite a while. It could just sit there for a while. We're not an organization about dogs, but it'll be there for quite a while, most likely. Sorry about that, John Humphrey Centre. I might have encouraged that. I don't think we even have a profile on Wikipedia right now. But that's something that people can do. And so things like ChatGTP will, you know, pull from Wikipedia, and they'll pull both correct and incorrect information. And they will feed that through. And then people can take that information and they can use that to spread misinformation, which is information that is incorrect, but people generally are not aware that they're spreading it. And then there's disinformation, which is information that is incorrect, but people are aware they're spreading false information. Kind of the difference between the two. Yeah, any other comments that people have on the hate pyramid of hate, or how you see it influenced the online space. Let me check online as well. Not yet. All right. Let us move to the next slide. Or any questions, I suppose, before we do move fully to that. Right. And please, if you have questions online, we can answer them all at the end, or we can stop throughout. I don't mind either way. So before we start getting into some tools of how we can address hate online and disinformation and misinformation, let's talk about the impacts of it. So we have well-being impacts, social impacts, career and academic impacts, and then also impacting our creative process. And I just want to, again, I'm going to keep bringing it back to the audience. So I want to know how, in your experience, whether you have been impacted by it directly or you have seen hate and oppression, discrimination online, what are some of the impacts to you? Like whether it's on your well-being, your social, your career, or creative impacts. I'll push it to you. Also, if people want to join the stage, completely free to. I can kind of start us off too and just talk about some of the impacts that it's had on me. So I used to work for an organization that was quite heavily involved with dealing with acts of hate. And even as I transitioned to the John Humphrey Centre, it's kind of one of my passion projects, right, is dealing with hate and oppression and discrimination. So it's something I'm still quite involved in. And it's had a fairly large well-being impact on me. It's impacted my mental health. It's definitely at points made it difficult for me to sleep. We know it impacts people's physical health as well. We know that hate and discrimination impacts people's things like even their amount of hospital time. And then if we look at our social impacts, it can impact things like our ability to connect with our families and our friends. It can impact our ability to be in groups that maybe we enjoy, like in our religious communities or our school communities or work communities. It can have a really intense impact on that, just making it more difficult for us to engage with it. And then when you look at like career and academic impacts, there's people who maybe they have to drop out of school if it's something that they're experiencing like at school. We know there's been many TikToks I've seen, for example, where I can't remember exactly which community it was, but there was a rural community here in Alberta where a individual was filmed kind of without their consent at a house party in a rural community. And that video was taken and it was uploaded to TikTok and then blasted out to the entire world, and people started saying hateful comments about their gender, about the color of their skin, and it just blew up so much larger. I'm going to knock over someone's water bottle here. So much larger than what it was in their original rural community. And it could have been still quite harmful there, right? Because we saw it started in their small community, it moved to the internet and got much larger, and then the internet can move back though to that physical space. Because now the impact of what everyone is saying online is impacting that person in their physical space too. So that can really impact maybe people's ability to go to school safely. It can impact their ability to maybe attend their job safely. And then I know we're going to have some art spaces here later on for everyone who's joining online. It can be a really severe impact to the creative process. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but just like going from my experience again, I'm a writer at heart. I love to write. It has had such an impact on me though, that I stopped for quite a few years, just fully stopped writing, even though it's something I love, that's something's part of me, it's integral to me. Had to stop for a couple of years just because it was so difficult to experience. And sometimes you can tell yourself that, well, it doesn't, it doesn't impact me. Maybe I'm not part of that group, or maybe, my skin's tough enough and it is impacting the group that I belong to and I can get through it, but it chips away at you. Even if you feel like you've built up resilience or you're used to it or you've normalized in some way, which is another form of trauma normalizing. It's traumatic to normalize hate. It chips away at a person, and it can take away all those little all those parts of your life that you really enjoy. But there are tools that we can use to keep ourselves protected when we're online, that ways that we can build true resilience, or ways that we can help inform ourselves when things are getting to be too much for us. I know one of the big things that both myself and other people have shared with me over the years is, well, I see it so much and I just kind of continue on with my day, you know? And I think that almost builds a pattern of trauma within us. And we get so used to us that maybe we don't listen to our own warning signs. Or so used to it, sorry, not us, that we don't listen to our own warning signs about the content that we see. Which we'll talk about a tool to kind of help us listen to those warning signs in just a minute. But I do want to offer it back up to, and if anyone wants to share how, seeing stuff online has impacted them in any way. And no pressure. I know this is a really difficult topic, and it can be hard to share that stuff online. And you don't have to share it if you don't want to. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess what we were talking about with the pyramid, I was like, the situation about explaining is probably like acts of bias maybe. So I'm in nursing school right now, so I feel like in the midst of like COVID-19, like nurses were like praised as like heroes and like like saviors for like humans and whatever for COVID-19. But then the minute that the idea of COVID-19 masking and regulations de-escalated, the importance of nurses in the community weren't so praised, and when nurses were expressing their needs regarding like understaffing and like not enough medical supplies or technologies to cater to the public, and it's affecting their mental health in the workplace. People are just like, basically, suck it up, that's your job, like, you can't pay for everything like that, like, that is your job to deal with everything.
Yeah.
I feel like as a nurse, you're not only a nurse, you're also like their therapist, you're also like their IT person, because, like, dealing with a client, you're dealing with helping them with their TV or whatever it is, or helping them with their medical devices when you're not trained for that. That's something that should be provided by the government or by the healthcare facility.
Yeah.
So I feel like at one point we were so praised, and suddenly it was just taken away from us, and that took a huge toll on what it feels to be a nursing student or to be a fusion nurse working in society. Yeah.
I'm going to summarize, and I apologize, it's not going to be as nuanced as what you said, but 100% agreed. We definitely saw, and are continuing to see kind of how nurses were treated. So what it was mentioned, like at the start of the pandemic, nurses were praised as heroes, as savers, right? And then as we saw the pandemic continue and some people start to like normalize or de-escalate with it, that narrative really switched against nurses. Where the needs that they had, it was ignored, they were demoralized, so they weren't given the resources that they needed, and on top of that, the narrative against them changed, where they were no longer heroes, but sometimes seen as enforcers of something that people didn't want. And nurses hold a really important position in our healthcare system. Like you mentioned, like they're not only there to seek to achieve like health needs for people, but they're also act almost as therapists and counselors and support people in so many different ways. And so it's really difficult for them to experience that hate or see how much it is turned against them when they're just trying to do like their jobs. Is that kind of summarized? Okay, sorry, I did not get the nuance of all that, but let me read a couple comments online, then we'll turn it back over to the physical space here as well. So 1 second, if I can learn how to scroll again. I've used a computer before, I swear. Yeah, so Anelka mentioned that we talked a bit about this in in group before. We've, I'm sorry, these are old comments. I'm so sorry, Angelica. Thank you. I got a mouse now. But I'll just read them out anyways because I want to make sure we capture that. So people were talking about how well-being is impacted by even one doubting oneself and no one seeing the possibility to connect with people in person or online. It has profound connection issues. I think that's one of the most harmful aspects of dealing with how oppression manifests both online and in person is that we doubt ourselves that we're experiencing it. We'll see it and we'll be like, well, I'm not sure if that's quite crossing the line or enough, or maybe I'm just overreacting. And so we harm ourselves that way as well by refusing to acknowledge our own experiences of hurt, of trauma. And then we have another comment. Just again on the impacts of hate, of how we've seen things like profiles being stolen and used to create harm. And it can be really damaging to their person, to their careers, etc. Absolutely. Impersonalization is such a huge issue, and it already was. And now with AI, it's gotten massive because we can, impersonate people's images right now. We can impersonate, like, both in photos and in videos. We can impersonate voice. We can impersonate even like the way that they write. If you go to ChatGPT right now and say, write me a short story in the style of, whatever author, you can get that. It's just a thing that you can get. You can impersonate the way that someone writes or their voice. And, you can still see it sometimes, though not everyone. Again, digital literacy is a spectrum, so it can be really easy for some people to detect AI, really difficult for others. So it's a spectrum. Then we have another comment from Alex. Also, hi, Alex. We wish you were here, but we're glad that you're staying home and being safe. So Alex mentions it's stressful to be the one monitoring accounts, having to delete hate comments since you can internalize those very easily. It can also make you feel like the majority of people are against you when you see a lot of negative or harmful comments. Going into public spaces becomes an uncomfortable environment since you're worried that some people may be thinking those things. Yeah. Internalization, I think, is a big part of it. You spoke about normalization or refusing to believe yourself when you're hurt about things. And it stays with you. And so it's hard not to sometimes go into, bring that from the online space, carry it with you into the public space, and wonder, like, are other people thinking those things? Am I going to be harmed by other people who are thinking those things? Am I going to experience some sort of trauma from people who might be thinking or may act on those things? So we carry it with us. And then we have one more comment from Katerina. Again, I apologize if I said your name wrong. Please let me know if you can spell it phonetically for me if I'm doing it incorrectly. That there are also serious psychological effects caused by isolation. Right, so it's not just, hate impacting this one thing. It's hate that impacts maybe your ability to go see your friends, which creates an isolating environment from you, which can have, those serious health impacts that we discussed. Katerina, perfect. All right. So it's not just like this impacts this. It's a wide spectrum of things that experiencing hate, experiencing oppression or racism or discrimination can impact on the person. Let's throw it back to the physical space here. Does anyone else want to share anything or like comment on some of what's been shared? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I wanted to bring up this video game that I think perfectly encapsulates, I think I said that right, all four of these categories, which I feel like it's a video game that's very underappreciated. It's called Venba. And it's about, it initially starts off as just a cookie game. You play as a couple who had just recently moved to Canada from India, and then they find out that they're going to have a kid. And you follow the kid as he grows up, and you start to learn that the kid isn't eating the food the traditional food that his parents make for him at school. You learn that he's being bullied, and his parents are struggling to find a job and experience like hate, like online over the phone. And it gets to the point really where the only time that he feels comfortable, like expressing like his culture and like just like everything that like he learned from his parents growing up is when like his white friends essentially find it quote unquote useful to them to make a what's supposed to be a documentary that's supposed to be all inclusive.
Mhm.
Only trying to use inclusivity to their own advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me try to explain that a little bit. So this is what I love about doing sessions like this and having people participate in it, because we learn more tools. And tools can take different shapes and different forms. So we had someone here in the audience mention a game called Venba. It's called VENBA. Looks like it's a short little game that talks about aspects of the impact of hate and discrimination, especially on young people, it sounds like, and how that interacts like in the family, how that interacts with like friends at school, and then it also talks about something like tokenization as well, and people in the dominant culture, in this case like the white culture there, using people who do experience hate to kind of further things like, diversity, or claim that they're being allies. So that sounds like a really fantastic and accessible tool for people. I really love just a very wide variety of tools, and games can be that. There's a lot of games that broach on really heavy topics. And they're not, all like really high action things. Sounds like this one's like a little short narrative one. So sometimes games are used to tell a story, sometimes they're used to teach a lesson. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. It's definitely one I'll be checking out later.
I do just want to give a trigger warning. There is implied violence in it.
Okay. Little trigger warning for anyone else who does want to go look at it. There's some implied violence, and then obviously these heavy discussions that we're having today. Thank you. Does anyone else would like to share? Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Also, with social media, I kind of lost people from very and show very people. There's people that have so much creativity in there, and social media can allow someone the courage to put themselves out there. It comes with a territory of having all my do. It's like, I really do just want to show people how I'm living, or how to make up, or how I do this, and how I do that. But the moment you put yourself out there, people are going to have something to say, how do you look, how you sound, your voice, where you come from, what you put, what you're showing to the world. And even yesterday, I was reading the most horrific comments, and I had to share it with my sister. This girl, she's like an influencer, so she's always in different types of clothing, and some people find her too sexy. She happens to be Muslim, and she went to the pilgrimage. And this other guy, who's also Muslim, puts like such a derogatory and such bad video, like reaction video about her, and basically calling her all kind of names and saying that she had no place being in something as sacred because she's basically an influencer. So there's this sense of like righteousness where people want you in a box. If you're here, stay here. You're not neutral. You're not allowed to do this or do it. You gotta be like in this one box.
Yeah. Oh, I think we're losing. All right. Yeah. Hopefully everyone can still hear us. That we might have lost something really quickly, but let me summarize that a little bit. So one of the participants here mentioned that on social media, people often use it to like share their gifts, whether that's art or maybe something like, and that how sometimes when people share those gifts, other people can come in and they will start judging, or they'll start saying something hateful, or something discriminatory, or they will just harass that person in some way. A story was shared about a young woman who was an influencer and also Muslim, correct? Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure I'm remembering correctly. Going to a sacred site and sharing her experience of that. And another individual came in and started harassing her, saying that she can't be both an influencer and go to our sacred sites. And people try and put certain people like in boxes. So you're not allowed to, be this thing, but also this thing, because it's not allowed for some reason. I think it's also remember that sometimes hate comes from our own groups as well. the groups that we belong to. For instance, I come from the queer community, and there's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of hate within the queer community towards other members of the community. You'll have like sometimes people who are in the dominant culture in the queer community, white people, white queer people, will be hateful towards people who aren't white, or maybe people who are trans, or people who don't quite fit in that exact box that they think a queer person should fit into. So it's important to recognize as well that the impacts can sometimes come from our own groups, especially if you don't fit the exact definition of what it means to be a good whatever it is in that group. Go ahead.
Sorry, I know that I keep
No.
Just going off of what you both said, I believe that it's also important to keep in mind where these biases and where this hate is coming from, because it could. I'm trying to think of a way to say this essentially, but overcoming hate can also be a form of decolonization, as an example. As a result of colonization, in a lot of indigenous communities, there is a divide between what women can do and what men can do, and a lack of teachings or understandings of people who are non-binary, two-spirit, etc. However, those ideations were typically forced onto indigenous culture. And from my experience, I have faced hate within my own communities because I am trans, and because that doesn't fit into the binary. So I think that it's important to understand where your own biases and where your own hate is coming from, and if it is a result of years of experiencing hate and having that forced upon you and forcibly giving you this bias or ideation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of on that same note, talking about maybe experiencing hate from your own community, fighting against hate can be an act of decolonizing. Because as we know, we had that anti-oppression session earlier today where we learned a little bit about the history of colonization and oppression in Canada. And we see how hate manifests. So we can, and how hate has impacted our own communities. So it was shared in indigenous communities. Sometimes colonizer beliefs and attitudes were forced on indigenous communities, right? And sometimes adopted by those communities. And so those original ways of teaching or original ways of thought were destroyed or ripped away or obscured in some way. And so it can take time to decolonize those beliefs and kind of return to a more balanced and more approachable way of thinking. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Did I summarize? Sorry, I kind of went off a little bit there.
See, I love this because you make me sound a lot more
I feel like I'm rambling. Apparently I sound articulate, so I'll take it. I'm using the wrong mouse to move my slide. All right. I'm just gonna kind of actually we're still okay on time, so if anyone else wants to share anything else, please feel free. Oh, thank you.
Just thinking about this, I was thinking about my friend who has, when you're explaining all the impacts it has, she is going, she's a co advocate for that, she gets hate she gets pushback from the university, for people online, and just seeing her in that space and how it's affected her academics. For example, she had to take some semesters off, take some semesters off because she didn't feel safe being on campus, and just the fact that the university didn't do anything to help her out. And also me thinking about how I could help her, because once we were on Twitter once, and I was trying to defend her against someone else who was insulting, and she just told me to stop, it's not helping. And also just thinking about how you can support your friends experiencing hate, especially when you see the impacts social life, through the academics, a creative process, and just overall, that's something I want to share.
Yeah, thank you. I'll do my best to summarize. One of the participants here mentioned they had a friend who was experiencing a lot of hate, I believe both online and in person.
Yeah.
And when they had reached out to support from the university, oh, hold on, the dark screen share. Okay, we're still okay. When they had reached out to support for the university, the university did not provide that support despite it happening in the university space. And so the impact was on your friend, but then also on you because you tried to assist them with kind of defending them against hate online. And for people who are experiencing hate, sometimes you do have to ask the other person to stop because sometimes it can get a little bit worse. And I think that's kind of what your friend shared with you. So it can be difficult to know when it's okay to step in or when it's welcome. Something we'll talk about. Actually, you're getting ahead of me, but we'll get there. I want to make sure. So let me check the comments and also just leave it open to the floor here. All right, we just had a little switch over the presentation, but we're good now. All right, does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Make sure I'm not missing anyone. That's transition for us because we're going to talk about tools that we can use now. So as soon as it moves over, 1 second. Oh, it just moved over. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So you provided amazing kind of flow for us into the next section about what can we do either when we see hate online or we see someone that we care about or that we know experiencing, or even people that we don't know experiencing hate online. So I'm going to share this little tool that we have. This is called and this is a tool that's basically used where anytime you either in person, like in the physical space or the online space, so I'm going to give online space examples mostly, where you can check in with yourself to see if you are ready to engage or address that kind of content. So we'll start actually at the bottom and we'll work our way up. So in a green light state, we are in a casual, relaxed state and nothing is requiring us to be alert. So this can be, for example, you're scrolling mindlessly through social media and there's nothing popping up that kind of sets you on edge or on alert. In the physical space, this could be just, enjoying time at your home and you're in a relaxed state. I do want to add a little note here before we move into the next two, that not everyone gets the privilege of experiencing a yellow light or a green light state. There's people who exist at yellow light all the time. There's people who exist at red light all the time because of maybe current events that are happening in the world where they're put more, where they're at risk, or they have a trauma that they're dealing with, or they live as a queer person, as a person who's been racialized, as a person who's been oppressed in some way. And so you sometimes do not get that privilege of being a green light. And it is a privilege of being in a relaxed state because some people have to live their whole lives without that. But let's move on to the next stage, the yellow light. So if you're at yellow light, something has your guard up. Our presentation just went again. Oh, okay. Something has your guard up, but you don't feel the need to get involved at that time, or you don't need to be involved because maybe someone else is handling it, for instance, or maybe the person that it impacts is handling it and they're okay. So this could be something like you saw a news article online and you're concerned about what, like maybe online interaction or reaction might be. In the physical space, this could be, a little hiccup in my throat. In the physical space, this could be like, say you are walking down or the side of a sidewalk and you see a car kind of go past you really fast. But you're safe and nothing's occurred, but you're like kind of unsure where that may be. And then finally, the red light stage. This is when something has happened. So you're on high alert and your two choices are to either ignore it or get involved in some way. So this could be something like you've seen someone say something hateful to another person online. So your choices are either to assess with yourself, do I have the capacity to address this, or do I need to move on from this? And this tool, it's really meant as a method to check in with yourself. As I talked a little bit earlier, I think we normalize the trauma of seeing hate and discrimination online. And I think it's true for everybody, no matter how long you've been in this and how aware of it, you do normalize it to an extent. It's a self-protecting measure, it's a coping measure, so it is okay, but it can be just as harmful to you still. So when you see something online, it's good to just like stop for a second, and this takes practice, trust me. It takes practice to be like, okay, I need to stop and not just keep scrolling like I'm used to. So it's a practice that you have to build of, what state am I in? Am I in a green light state where I feel okay to just keep going? Or am I yellow light state where I don't, I'm a little bit wary, but I might not need to get involved? Or am I in a red light state? Am I having that reaction of a red light state? And it became difficult at first to kind of start to recognize when you're in that red light state, because everyone's a little bit different. It could be like a moment of frustration or anger. You could feel like those trauma responses of like, maybe your anxiety starts to get up, maybe you get a little bit clammy, maybe you start to feel like that pressure on your chest. It varies a lot. It could just be like annoyance. It could be like, well, that's ridiculous. And then you keep going, right? But you could still be in a red light state. So it's something that you have to start to watch yourself for very carefully. But the purpose of it is really not only to learn how to check in with yourself, but what to do when you do that check-in. So say you check in with yourself and you recognize, okay, I'm in a red light state. What is my two options here? Well, I can either ignore it or I can continue to get involved. If you ignore it, at least you checked in with yourself and you recognize that you're in a red light state. However, there's some action plans for when you're in that red light state too. It could be to just keep scrolling, though I don't recommend it. I think if you recognize that you're in a red light state, that is oftentimes your note. If you don't feel like you can address it at that moment, that is your indication to step back a little bit. It's your indication to like, all right, let's take a break from online, resettle myself. Let's not keep re-traumatizing myself, and take a step back. The other option is to get involved in some way. So getting involved can look like different things. Getting involved can look like addressing the person that maybe, like say it's a hate comment that we see online. It can look like addressing the person that is perpetuating that hate. That's one option. Another option is checking in on the person that is experiencing that hate. I think our gut reaction is to go address the person that's perpetuating hate because we want to fight against it, right? It's our instinct. We see some sort of injustice and we want to bring justice. But it's really, really important to not forget the people who are impacted by that hate. Or if you're the person impacted by that hate. So it could be like check in maybe with an individual who's being impacted by that hate, see if they have support. Or if you are the person impacted by that hate, what do you need for support? So that's addressing it too. That's not getting involved. It's not ignoring it. It's checking in with yourself, whether you are the victim of it or you're seeing it. What do I need in that moment? What support do I need? Do I need to reach out to friends and family? Do I need to take a walk? Do I need to like nourish myself in some way with water or food? So it's a practice. And it takes a very, very long time. It's something that we're kind of going to constantly be in the middle of learning. How do I check in with myself? How do I practice? So that's kind of like red light of, sorry, I'm just trying to collect my train of thought again. And I think it's something that we have to practice when we're in yellow light as well, because it can be really difficult sometimes to determine whether we're in yellow light or red light at first. I'm trying to remember who mentioned it, where it was, I think actually it was online, where Angelica mentioned that, let me just pull that up really quickly. Doubting oneself. I think that's really, really common online. You see something that is harmful online and you start to doubt yourself, like, am I overreacting to that? Or is that what that person really means? And you kind of start to gaslight yourself a little bit of what your experience is. So it's going to it takes a little bit of practice to get into, kind of figure out that definition between yellow and red light. And speaking of practice, we're actually going to do a little bit of that. And so Adara, we're going to move over to the next slide, if you don't mind. Really quickly, actually, before we do that, a little bit of a trigger warning before we get into these. This is talking about people's experiences with like racism. There's some racist jokes and memes in here. Identifying information, unless it was public information, has been blurred out. But we will take a look at these 2 slides. And I will read them out because I want to make sure that we are accessible here. But we have 2 different memes that are shared. The top one has an image of people, protesters in a line, and there's a comment underneath it that says, to protect racism, students block white people from getting to class. And at the bottom, there is an image of one of the bad guys from the Marvel, sorry, I'm blanking, from the Marvel movies. It says, I use the racism to make more racism. And then the second image has same kind of format. The top is the protesters, and the bottom image is another meme image that says, you have become the very thing you swore to destroy. So when we look at an image like that, say we just happen to see it on, I don't know, Instagram or something, is where a lot of these pop up. Does that put you into green light, yellow light, or red light? So we're just gonna take a really quick, and it's totally fine, no matter what you choose, it's gonna be different for everyone. And it could just be that you have, maybe it doesn't impact you in the same way, or you're able to kind of deal with the feelings that it brings up in you. So all answers are correct. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious. What for people, and I know, sorry, the Real Retreat folks, you've experienced this before, who feels it puts them in green light? And feel free to share online as well. Yeah, we've got no one here who feels it puts them in green light. What about yellow light? Oh, yeah, we've got a handful of people. This is immediately for me as well. And then red light. Yeah, we've got a few folks sharing red light as well. Just that immediate alert is there. Does anyone kind of want to talk about like what puts you in that yellow light zone for the people who answered yellow light? No worries if you don't want to share. Yeah, go ahead, Alicia.
I think we just don't get a lot of context about what that protest is. Like, it could have been like an effective protest, or it could have been very ineffective depending on kind of some of the things surrounding it. I just get really, really frustrated by like reverse racism rhetoric.
We had a participant mention here that we have no context for what is happening here. And so it's difficult to even figure out how to respond. However, there's that immediate frustration of the reverse racism rhetoric that we're seeing here of, racism. It's, racism against white people. And it's just like, there's no reverse racism. It's just racism. Just what it is, right? So it can be really frustrating, especially when it's stripping stories from people, especially. Yeah, go ahead.
Just going off of that, not knowing the context of this protest, good chances are that the people that made these memes also don't know the context. They just basically made the context to make this meme format.
Yeah, just kind of going off again. We don't know the context, and the people who made this meme likely also don't know the context. They're just using it to make this meme format. Did anyone else want to share? Thought I saw another hand. Yes.
They probably just made that meme to basically get clout, get attention, and just have a platform for themselves while misusing critical events in society.
Yeah. There was a participant here mentioned that it's someone using this to get clout, to get attention, and misusing potential very important political events to grab attention to and divert attention from a potentially a very important story. Yeah, let me check online. I didn't miss any other hands, did I? No. All right, for the people who answered red light, why, if you don't mind sharing, what puts you in red light for this one?
Much what Alicia was saying, reverse racism.
Yeah, it's just that mention of reverse racism, which I understand. It's like immediately your guard is up. It's like, all right, what's coming next almost. Yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone. And then for the people like, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay.
sometimes kind of, I guess, gauge where I not like, but I feel like if I saw this, I'd be like a green light, it'd be like the same reason. I just think that like, don't really think reverse racism, it's not really the point of racism, right? It's about power.
Yeah.
So like reverse racism itself kind of takes away from that meaning. I think every time something concludes, I always see it as like a pathetic effort to think about something. Like if I saw this, I would have like chuckled, think about like how desperate must you be to create a problem with it's not actually like what racism is, it's prejudice and basis, right? But I think, so I would think that would be like the green light.
Yeah.
And it's like also like that's big on perspective, like who are the type of people who really those things, right? And then those are the type of people who, I would assume probably in a typing way or like calling people. And so they would also probably misusing photos, right?
Yeah, misusing photos,
right?
sure.
Yeah, so maybe fostering it as well. We think that would be why.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the instances of this happening is so minute, it rarely happen, that, again, it have to be so desperate and so pathetic to actually make something. And, so I guess that would be why.
Yeah. Just to summarize kind of a potential green light response, that you can, for green lights, people who answer green light, that this can be seen, it's kind of like a pathetic attempt. Apologies, I'm getting I'm like losing track of your conversation. It's kind of a pathetic attempt of, it is kind of almost foolish, and you can kind of like, well, this is like what kind of person is doing this? You kind of almost just laugh it off because it's like, it's not even worth your time to address. Sorry, that's not quite as.
Yeah, and again, I understand that. I don't know, it's Yeah, but I think coming from like my experience of when you want to program for say things like this, these are very specific and lack of context of how engaging it is.
Yeah, like it was mentioned, sorry, it comes like, who would say this kind of thing? It comes from a pretty specific group, and, sometimes it's not worth giving your energy to that group. So kind of, Right, moving on to the next example. So if we can move to the next slide, Dara. Oops. Yeah, we have another meme here. Well, not so much a meme. It's a comment on a public page that says on the left, there's a Canadian flag, and it says Canada wrecked, second best country in the world. And then you have a handful of comments on there that say, and I'm sorry if it's difficult for the in-person participants to see, but I will read it out. One comment says, whoever made that list is tripping hard. And then another person says they forgot to include cost of living in the analysis. Another comment says, and I apologize, this is a little triggering, just a mention of shootings. That's the second best of shootings. And then we have another comment that says, I am grateful I live in Canada, but not so grateful on what it is becoming. Another comment that says, and this is local page, so a little bit of context, says, I bet Edmonton got higher crime rate than Chicago these days. And then a final comment that says, how are we ranked 2 when we still have people with no access to clean water? Let's do a little bit of a survey again. Apologies, I know some of these are really difficult things to kind of start to look at. Anyone who, that's a green light for them. We got a couple green lights. Anyone who's yellow light? Got a few yellow lights. Anyone who's a red light? Oh, am I the only red light? Oh, there we go. Okay, we got a few people who are red lights with me. And again, no wrong answers here. Things impact everybody differently, right? Does anyone want to share their experiences of why? Yeah, go ahead. Also, sorry, 1 second. Andrew, are we able to turn the microphone just because I feel like we're not picking up people's true comments?
Angelica was like, oh, it's too shaky.
Oh, unless people don't want, Oh, the sound. That's so fair. Okay, maybe we leave it as is then. I apologize.
I was just gonna say that, usually if I were to see that post, I'd probably just scroll by it, like I wouldn't necessarily interact with the comments. But if I were to interact with the comments, as suggested the picture, I would not rank it as a green. I would probably rank it higher, possibly even to an extent of red, because I do feel strongly about the water, access to water, and as well as like the instances of shooting, especially recently with the gun.
Yeah.
So I feel like that really like hits close to home, like you never know.
Sorry, folks, 1 second for me. I just started watering like crazy. Hannah, would you mind maybe taking over for me really quickly? I'm so sorry to put you on the spot.
Okay.
I apologize.
No worries, I'm popping in. Can I actually share my reflection? I was gonna raise my hand up anyways, so I'll take the opportunity to maybe share something. I'm gonna break the tech if I sit here. There's lots of wires preventing it.
What about cable on?
It's okay, they can hear, it's all that matters. So for the red, today I actually read an article. It's okay, they can hear me. If I sit down, I might pull one of this wires down, it'll be a bigger issue. So there's this article I was reading today, those change.org protests. And today, this morning, there was one, now that Tiff mentioned this particular meme, I guess, or picture, it reminded me of it. So it's extra red for me today, just because it's in the forefront of my mind. And it's pretty much the Northern Indigenous communities in Canada are being disproportionately impacted by the high rates of infant mortality. This issue has a significant and devastating impact on these communities as it takes away the lives of their most vulnerable members. Take, for instance, the recent tragedy of Manitoba infant that died senselessly due to delayed medevac flight to the closest emergency department when his laboring mother needed assistance due to his dangerous breech presentation in the birth canal. So just the idea that we have a high infant mortality rate in northern communities, that just because of basic access, that immediately today, it was already going to be a red, but today was like that extra red. So just sharing my reflection. Thank you.
It would be neat to get an eyelash in the middle of my presentation live. But just to go back to what a participant shared, we can also change our kind of where we're landing on the traffic light as well. So you might start it as a green and just scroll past without thinking. But if you look a little bit deeper, you can maybe get to that yellow state. Or if you see something that's particularly triggering the comment, even that red state. Anyone else want to share?
Just laugh at it and keep scrolling.
Yeah, just laugh at it and keep scrolling.
To have it be more, it's just
Yeah. So it's kind of normalized, not even thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which can be harmful to you as well. Yeah, anyone else? Go ahead.
I just wanted to share the way that I viewed the post as a whole in case it's different from anyone else, because I'm curious. But from the way that I see it, I think where to start exactly. From the way that I see it with the comments, people are voicing their concerns that they see within the country, but framing it as at least to me, it comes off as more aggressive. I do understand being concerned about people's safety, concerned about the housing crisis and everything. But then when it got to the shooting comment, that was a immediate red light for me.
Yeah.
Everything else was you're allowed to voice your opinion, your concerns that are happening within the country. So that's why I come up with the yellow light.
Yeah, again, there was another comment kind of about that fluctuation of intensity in the whether you're green, yellow, or red. Of most of this maybe are at yellow light, but then there's one particular comment that maybe is a little bit more aggressive or a little less nuanced that'll shoot you up to a red. Also, Adara, we can't see the presentation anymore. There we go. All right, does anyone else want to share? We have got one more example. All right, We'll go to the final one, Adara, and maybe if you can hit play on the video for me. Nothing immediately triggering on here, but we have, I don't know if we can hear the sound. Oh no.
You have to share the audio.
Okay, you have to share your audio, Adara. It's one of those interview on the street kind of things, and it's just like an example of how sometimes people's responses are manipulated. So. Oh. Still no sound, no. That's okay, I can really quickly grab the transcript. Adara is asking how to share audio.
It should be in the settings for me.
If you go to the settings in the bottom right-hand corner, and then you should be able to share your audio that way.
Or no, it's when you click the share button, see the one to lots of settings. There's a share button. It should let you.
Yeah. Yeah. We're basically done the presentation, so yeah. That's okay, Adara. Don't worry about it. Essentially, what it is you have one of those person on the street interviews where you have the interviewer asking, what's the capital of this particular country, and the person who's being interviewed says something that's completely wild and doesn't make sense. And then there's a cut in the video, and the person being interviewed comes back in and says, that was edited. That's not what I said in response to that question. It's kind of the gist of the video. So just like that, the person who was interviewing cut two different responses to make it seem like the person being interviewed was saying something that was like, silly or something laughable. And it's a bit different from our other ones. This kind of goes more into the idea of like misinformation and disinformation. Oh, we're good to go now? Yeah, let's try it one more time. No audio. Yeah, you need to unmute. Tech issues. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Let's just have a conversation. We don't have to worry about going into that. Yeah, I know it's a little bit different, but how do we feel people on green? Where are you feeling? Yeah, green. People on green. People on yellow. Yeah, we got quite a few on yellow and people on red. I will be the one red person and I will explain why this immediately sets me off. And it's not even this particular video because it's a little bit, it's a little bit silly. It's kind of bordering on harmless, but it just reminds me of how this is being used in so many other things and how maliciously it is being used in other instances of clipping together people's audio to make them sound like they're saying something really awful, or clipping together people's audio to make it sound like they're not saying something really awful. So for me, why I go to red is it's not just that video, it's everything that video reminds me of and all the other experiences of horrible things that maybe I've seen before. And that's why it immediately it's just a reminder, Does anyone want to share their experiences of like why they're yellow on that video? Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of agree with you. It reminded me of other videos that I've seen similar to this, but on a more first scale. For example, this one, there's actually a YouTube video where this YouTuber basically looked into the sales of like a certain clothing, like certain dress, and how they weren't authentic to the true brand, and these fake brands were using real influencers' video clips to sell their fake products, and in some cases, the dress didn't even arrive to the the customer, right? And so these people that interact with such ads of these fake brands blame it on the influencers, saying that they're the ones who are stealing it, and it almost goes to say like maybe even like I wouldn't say like impersonating that person, but like kind of using their identity as well.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the examples given was brands sometimes like engaging influencers to advertise their products, right? But sometimes we'll use influencers who have maybe given advertisements for other products, but a certain brand will grab that and make it seem like they're advertising their product. And maybe that product is poor quality or doesn't get sent. And then you'll see sometimes the people, those influencers who had maybe nothing to do with this, getting attacked or maybe experiencing hate or discriminatory comments as a result of their being misattributed essentially to this. Or like, it's almost like it's a form of impersonation. It definitely is. Yeah, go ahead, we have another comment.
I've seen like pretty much the exact same thing happen with like medical practitioners who are influencers. So they're suddenly grabbed to advertise potentially harmful products or useless products that are being advertised to treatments that shouldn't be treated by actual doctors or like through actual medications. And these like TikTok doctors or influencers are like very well trusted in the advice that they give, so it's like actually harmful to people's health.
Yeah, and kind of like the escalation of that. We have one person mentioned here of maybe people who are like, we see sometimes doctors or nurses as influencers too, or just like sharing information. We saw it a lot at the beginning of the pandemic of people trying to spread information, and sometimes how their words are twisted or attributed to something else, and maybe they accidentally spread, or maybe they spread harmful information. Yeah, it's a great example of kind of like that gradual escalation that we can see with it. Does anyone want to share what either yellow or red, how that made it feel? Yeah.
So I initially went with yellow because, like, I understand that, like, I'm trying to think of a way to start. I start speaking and then I get nervous. It's a little quick mind. Where essentially, like, the first thing that came to my head when you explained the video was, if anyone remembers the whole live action Scooby-Doo movie, Fred is kind of like flirting with like this newscaster, but then and later on in the movie sucks.
Yeah, that's.
And so like stuff like that like normalized it for me, which is why I was like in yellow. After hearing like you like explain like how dangerous it actually is, I think that like moving on.
Yeah. So just to explain that a little bit, we had a participant share about, I don't know if anyone remembers, and this is definitely going to show my age a little bit, the old Scooby-Doo live action movie where you have the character Freddy being interviewed by someone who's, you know, he can kind of tell that his words are starting to be used against him. Because the interview's asking, well, what do you think about Coolsville? And Freddie's like, well, you're going to make me try and say, like, Coolsville sucks or something. And then that gets clipped later to make him say Coolsville sucks. And that initially put one of our participants here at a yellow, but then hearing other people's experiences with that, I was like, oh, actually, that's maybe more of a red now. So I think it's really important to also, like, kind of recognize when maybe you start as a yellow and maybe that starts to escalate a little bit, because that can sometimes make you engage in something that might be harmful to you just because you don't recognize fully that you're moving toward red. But it's good practice though. You recognize like, oh, I was at a yellow, but then there's added context. This makes it a red for me. So maybe I need to like step back, or maybe I need to like, you know, ask myself like, why does that make me feel like I'm in a red? You know, so it's self-practice. I want to open it up to a few of the people that we haven't heard from too much today, or the online people. I'm going to read a comment here, and then if anyone who hasn't spoken today, we'd really love to hear from you. No pressure, of course. I understand it's a space where you can jump in or out. We have a commenter saying, I would be yellow because that reminds me of how easily people are willing to manipulate things just for entertainment value. It could have been used in a certain type of person to seem like they had less knowledge than others in the video. Absolutely, it does. I think often one that I've seen that happens quite frequently where we'll have an interview with a great big map of the world, and they try to get people to be like, where's Africa on this? And like people can't guess where Africa is. And like you don't know how doctored that clip was. You know, they could have pointed it out immediately. And maybe sometimes people don't understand where, oh, it's happened again. Sorry, this computer desperately wants to update, but it's fine. You don't understand how edited a clip might be. And then we can see, oh my gosh, how dangerous that can be, say, when we get into the space of health information that needs to get out, or in politics, how easily that can be manipulated and posted to certain, like, say, hate groups, or, you know, specific groups that maybe are trying to serve a particular political agenda. So they can appear really, really malicious. Yeah, I just want to, again, open the floor. Anyone who has talked yet, if they wanted to share. That's all right.
I feel like I've shared before.
Yeah.
I said I was agreeing with this one because we do see a lot of kind of those doctor videos, right, that really kind of is edited that way to like for clicks, right, for clout. But I think in this case, why if I kind of like position myself as in the green light is because like we rarely see people actually kind of counter that. We don't really see counter narratives that often. So I think those social media does provide that space for hate, but it also does provide that space for like self-advocacy or like advocacy in general, right? So like we don't see that in print media or like in reviews. So like if I see something like this, I would be like, oh, good for him for like actually, you know, standing up for himself, saying this was wrong, and actually coming out with his like full narrative.
Yeah.
So I think that would be like why we would have seen it in the green light, because it would be so different than like, all the different we've seen so far, and like understanding that it's also a teachable moment. And I think like I would then learn like, okay, I see videos from this person, now I know to place it in critically that it's me not me.
Yeah.
So I think that would be why I would be in the green light.
Yeah. An excellent example for why someone might be in the green light here. This is a counter narrative. We see someone actively fighting against misinformation here, being like, no, that's not actually what happened. Here's what happened. And it's also a teachable moment. I mean, we're using it for a teachable moment right now to show that example of like how things can be edited and flipped around to create like these misinformation or disinformation narratives. Yeah, so that's an excellent example of a green light for us too. Yeah, kind of reaching the end of our presentation. I don't know if we have Angelica or Dara to put it up again just to share the contact information that we have for all our lovely people online. But yeah, I'm going to be here for the next couple minutes if people have any sort of questions, either in person or online. Please feel free if you have any questions for me as we kind of reach the end of this. And I really thank you all for joining us this evening. I know we're getting later into the evening. I think if there's one call to action I'd have at the very end of this is to start checking in on yourself when you're online, because it's a practice that takes a long time to develop. And actually maybe two calls to action is start educating yourself, if you haven't already, on what AI is, both like video forms, animation, sound, music, pictures. And I think sometimes we hear very often about, or some people who are starting to engage with the practice of AI, that the worst AI is ever going to be is today. So it's always going to get better. But I think one of the things that we don't hear, because that's a really scary statement for a lot of people, the worst AI is ever going to be is today, and it's just going to get better and better and harder to detect. What I will say is that is true. However, it is also true that our ability to detect AI and to learn about AI and become educated is also the worst it's ever going to be is today. So we can always get better. We're always going to get better as a society about determining whether something is misinformation or disinformation. And we're always going to keep moving forward. We will step back sometimes, but we will continually move forward. And I think that's where I'll stop talking and leave it open to questions. Yeah.
This isn't really a question, but could I possibly give an example of how I implement the traffic system?
Yeah, we have someone who's willing to give an example of how we implement the traffic system.
So for me personally, I have been the game master for several Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. Yeah, and what I do before we start the campaign is I give all my players a consent checklist, which is a list of themes and subject topics. And what they can do is they can highlight those themes and subject topics either using green, yellow, or red. So just like you talked about, like green being, I'm perfectly like comfortable with this, yellow's like, kind of not the most comfortable with this, but we can keep like inching forward, and then red is like full stop. And then on top of that, when we're actually in the game, I encourage the players to have cards with them, specifically like yellow and red cards. So if we encounter a subject matter that they don't feel comfortable with entirely, they can either pull up the yellow or the red, and then we can take a break for 5 minutes and see where we can go from there.
Yeah. So we have an example that I'll definitely talk to you more about later, using it in gaming spaces, the traffic light, and how to implement that in physical spaces. Of, if you're doing something like, for instance, we talked about tabletop RPGs here, where you in a collaborative storytelling environment, and you want to check in with everyone who's there first. So what are topics that are green light for you? What are topics that are yellow? What are topics that are red? And then also implementing something that's called like an X card system, where you can like maybe hold up a little card that has like either an X on it or like a yellow or a red to kind of indicate how you're feeling, and then stopping that. And stopping whatever's happening in that moment, having a discussion or a break, and then once you come to some sort of conclusion, being able to come back. Another way that we did this today for our in-person, we didn't quite do it as robust as we usually do, just because we were a little bit stuck on time, is our community agreement over there. So for everyone who's online, we generally when we go into sessions, we have something called the community agreement. It's a set of rules that we can all look together for keeping, or look at with each other for keeping spaces like safer and open. There's a lot of different ways to do community agreements. We've done kind of like a basic one, but like a lot of times when we go into like sessions like this, we can build them together. And this is something that we'll gradually build together because for everyone else, we have a couple days here together. So we'll be building our community. And that's a traffic light system as well. It's like what things are okay for us to say, what things are okay for us to do, how can we be more safe, brave, inclusive while we're working together. Yeah, thank you for that.